This evening we're going to be reading from Mark 9, verses 14 through 35. And it says, "When they came to the other disciples, they saw a large crowd around them and the teachers of the law arguing with them. As soon as all the people saw Jesus, they were overwhelmed with wonder and ran out to greet him. 'What are you arguing with them about?' he asked. A man in the crowd answered, 'Teacher, I brought you my son who is possessed by a spirit that has robbed him of speech. Whenever it seizes him, it throws him to the ground. He foams at the mouth, gnashes his teeth, and becomes rigid. I asked your disciples to drive out the spirit, but they could not.' 'You are unbelieving generation,' Jesus replied. 'How long shall I stay with you? How long shall I put up with you? Bring the boy to me.' So they brought him. When the spirit saw Jesus, it immediately threw the boy into a convulsion. He fell to the ground and rolled around, foaming at the mouth. Jesus asked the boy's father, How long has he been like this?' 'From childhood,' he answered. 'It has often thrown him into fire or water to kill him. But if you can do anything, take pity on us and help us.' 'If you can't,' said Jesus, 'anything is possible for one who believes.' Immediately the boy's father exclaimed, 'I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief.' When Jesus saw that a crowd was running to the scene, he rebuked the impure spirit. 'You deaf and mute spirit,' he said, 'I command you, come out of him and never enter him again.' The spirit shrieked, convulsed him violently, and came out. The boy looked so much like a corpse that many said, 'He's dead.' But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him onto his feet, and he stood up. After Jesus had gone indoors, the disciples asked him privately, 'Why couldn't we drive it out?' He replied, 'This kind can come out only by prayer.' They left that place and passed through Galilee. Jesus did not want anyone to know where they were, because he was teaching his disciples, and said to them, 'The Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men. They will kill him, and after 3 days he will rise.' But they did not understand what he meant and were afraid to ask him about it. They came to Capernaum, where, when he was in the house, he asked them, 'What were you arguing about on the road?' But they kept quiet, because on the way they had argued about who was the greatest. Sitting down, Jesus called the 12 and said, 'Anyone who wants to be the first must be the very last and the servant of all.'"
Thank you, brother, for reading that so much. And here we have an account where we can learn a great deal from the disciples of Jesus. And in many ways, the disciples provide for us so many lessons. And it's so easy for us to find their fault and where they went wrong and where they missed it. And sometimes, at the same token, not see where we ourselves are at times similar to them. And so we're going to study this passage this afternoon together. And really what we're going to do is we're going to start back. I didn't want John to read the entire chapter there, but we're going to also consider verses 1 through 13 as well, because really that's where the context of this event and what's going on here begins, in our study at least. And you see that in verse 1 of chapter 9, Jesus explains to them, "Verily I say unto you, that there be some of them that stand here which shall not taste of death till they have seen the kingdom of God come with power." Well, there's a certain understanding that the disciples had, the apostles had, regarding the kingdom and Jesus coming and establishing the kingdom, and that was incorrect. They believed and they had thought that the kingdom was more of a physical kingdom and that Jesus was coming to reestablish and make sure that Israel was prominent once again. We see, for example, in Acts chapter 1, before Jesus ascends into heaven, Jesus is there conversing with the apostles, and in verse 6, they come to him and they ask him, saying, "Lord, wilt thou at this time restore again the kingdom to Israel?" See, they had understood that Jesus was powerful, but they believed and they had wanted and desired his power and his preeminence to really reign in a physical sense. And so they're looking forward to the physical exaltation and esteeming of Israel and are asking in that context. In Luke chapter 24, We see here the Emmaus Road experience of Jesus interacting here with some folks that are not aware that Jesus is communing and conversing with them. And we see here that they are amazed that Jesus is asking them questions and questioning why they are sad and why they are upset. He knows that they are having difficulty with trying to understand how it is that Jesus had passed. And so verse 19, we see Jesus asking, "What things did they say to him concerning Jesus of Nazareth, which was a prophet mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how the chief priests and our rulers delivered him to be condemned to death and have crucified him. But we trusted that it had been he which should have redeemed Israel. And beside all this, today is the third day since these things were done. Yea, and certain women also of our company made us astonished, which were early at the sepulchre. And when they found not his body, they came saying that they had also seen a vision of angels, which said that he was alive. And certain of them which were with us went to the sepulchre and found it even so as the woman had said, but him they saw not. And he said unto them, O fools, and slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken, ought not Christ to have suffered these things and to enter into his glory?" Verse 27, "And beginning at Moses and all the prophets, he expounded unto them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself." And so see, they had an understanding, and it was misaligned, it was incorrect regarding the kingdom and regarding the work of Jesus. And Jesus here is correcting them. And the apostles, in many ways, saw things in a very similar light. In Mark chapter 9 and verse 1, as Jesus makes this statement that his kingdom, the kingdom of God, is going to come with power, we then see following that the apostles then have an opportunity to see Jesus being there with Elias and Moses, and they're talking with Jesus in verse 4. Of course, Peter, James, and John are the ones present on this occasion. And we see in verse 7 that the Father says, "This is my beloved Son, hear him." And so Jesus is going to now take over the reins. He is now going to be given the kingship and is going to be given the rule and authority of law concerning God and his dealings with man. It's no longer going to be Moses. It's no longer going to be Elijah. It's no longer going to be the prophets. But now Jesus is the one that is to be heard. And so if you are in the apostles' shoes, if you are now aware that the kingdom of God is coming, if you are now aware and Jesus is making it clear based upon this transfiguration and based upon his work that he is going to be king, what might be going through your mind? Well, as we're going to see in just a moment, they unfortunately were trying to figure out how they were going to end up stacking up against one another. And they were more concerned with really where it is that they're going to be promoted and how it is that they're going to benefit physically based upon the things that they're understanding and how it is that they're understanding it. And unfortunately, they're blind to their own difficulties and blind as well to the very power and purpose of Christ, even as they are thinking and contemplating these things. Notice with me here the account that was read just a few minutes ago by John in Mark chapter 9, verses 14 through 32. We see the cure taking place, the cure that Jesus then provides to this father and his son. And we notice the rebuke of Jesus in verse 19. He explains, as the father had provided a reason as to why he's in this predicament. He explains there in verse 18, the disciples, Jesus' disciples, they are not able to cast out this demon. And Jesus explains in verse 19, "O faithless generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I suffer you? Bring him unto me." In Matthew's account, in Matthew chapter 17, Jesus in his rebuke also explains the kind of faith and the unbelief that exists on the part of his disciples concerning this effort to cast out this demon. In verse 20 of Matthew 17, he says, "Because of your unbelief, for verily I say unto you, if ye have faith as a grain of mustard seed, ye shall say unto this mountain, remove hence
to yonder place, and it shall remove, and nothing shall be impossible unto you. Howbeit, this kind goeth not out, but by prayer and fasting. They were not spiritually minded. They were not recognizing their purpose. They were not recognizing the purpose of Christ, but rather they were more concerned with what it was that they were able to do and the physical outcomes, and so therefore were not trusting in the Lord and were not focused on the spirituality of his kingdom. And so therefore, when we get down to verses 30 and 32, as Jesus is explaining here the crucifixion, we see how they respond and how they hear what it is that Jesus is saying unto them. Have you ever been in that kind of situation before? Where you say something to someone and you mean it in one way, but you recognize that the way in which they hear it is actually in a far different, if not the complete opposite way, in the way in which you originally and intend for it to mean. We, I'm sure, are familiar with these kinds of situations. When we try to say something and people really just hear what it is they want to hear, rather than really what it is we are saying. And so Jesus explains here, verses 30 and 32, he takes his apostles, his disciples, privately. He is trying to instruct them. He is trying to teach them. In verse 31, the Son of Man is delivered into the hands of men, and they shall kill him. And after that he is killed, he shall rise the third day. But they understood not that saying and were afraid to ask him. Now, why might they be afraid? Well, it's possible that they're afraid because they recognize their minds are not in the right state and they're not perceiving things in the spiritual context and the way in which they should be perceiving things. But it's also possible that the rebuke of Peter is fresh on their minds. Look with me back in chapter 8. Chapter 8, and notice here, beginning in verse 31, and he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things, and be rejected of the elders and of the chief priests and scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. And he spake that saying openly, and Peter took him and began to rebuke him. But when he had turned about and looked on his disciples, he rebuked Peter, saying, Get thee behind me, Satan. For thou savorest not the things that be of God, but the things that be of men. And certainly Peter here is advocating on the part of Satan, and so Jesus' rebuke is directed towards Satan, but it's through Peter based upon what it is that Peter is desiring, which is of the physical nature and the physical concern of Jesus Christ. And so we see that physicality and that mindset continuing on as Jesus then deals with his kingdom in chapter 9 and verse 1, as he deals with his kingship there in verses 2 through 7. Peter and James and John, Peter then responds as his transfiguration is taking place and saying, hey, we need to be building 3 tabernacles here. One for you, one for Moses, one for Elias in verse 5. He's not recognizing what this all is about. He's still thinking physically. And then lo and behold, verses 14 through 29, they're still thinking physically, even regarding the cure. They don't have the faith that they should be having as this demon needs to be cast out. And so Jesus is explaining to them once again regarding his crucifixion and the sacrifice that he is going to engage in, and they're still missing it. Now, after all of these things have happened, if you're in the shoes and in the role of one of these apostles, what are you thinking to yourself? Well, we should be thinking, and it's very easy for us to do this now, to put ourselves in the apostles' shoes as we're reading of their mistakes and saying, I need to be taking a step back and saying, surely I am missing something here. I am getting something wrong here. Jesus keeps trying to explain this to me. I'm clearly not able to cast out these demons. He has to come up behind me and do it for me. I don't have enough faith. I'm not thinking of things spiritually. I'm thinking of things physically. But that's not the mindset of the apostles at all. Their mindset instead is bickering between one another as to which of them is the greatest. It's mind-boggling, isn't it? That after all of these things have taken place, after their own failures have been clearly on display, to the point at which even the scribes are now charging them, questioning them regarding their inability to do these kinds of things, verses 14 through 16 there. They're basically an embarrassment regarding Jesus and his cause, they're bickering amongst each other as to who is the greatest. And so Jesus then is delivering a correction unto them. In verse 35, if any man desire to be first, the same shall be last of all and servant of all. Verse 35, he then takes a child and uses an object lesson to remind them and teach them and instruct them as to the kind of people that they should be. The ones that they are going to receive, they're going to be able to receive such ones when they themselves are behaving in like manner. Notice as well his correction and instruction back in Matthew's account. Chapter 17, verses 14 through 21 is where the account of the curing of the son occurred. And then we see in chapter 18, beginning there in verse 2, Jesus calls a little child unto him. He sets him in the midst of them, and he says unto them, verily I say unto you, except ye be converted and become as little children, ye shall not enter into the kingdom of heaven. Whosoever therefore shall humble himself as this little child, the same is greatest in the kingdom of heaven. See, the apostles needed to learn a great deal regarding their ambition, regarding what it was that they were striving after and what it was that they were seeking after, what their objective, what their goal, what their mission was. If it was to truly be great in the eyes of Jesus Christ, that was not going to be achieved by simply having some kind of title or by having some kind of physical dominance over another. Rather, that was going to be achieved by thinking spiritually minded and by humbling themselves as a little child, being teachable, being fully trusting, being willing to serve and give of themselves for the benefit of others. The apostles, the disciples of Jesus, had a lot to learn. And so we can learn a great deal here by the correction that's provided to them, and we can ask ourselves whether or not we are in need of a correction. Brother or sister, are you here this afternoon and you find yourself far away from being likened unto a child? As you take on more responsibility, as you take on more stress in your day-to-day life, you find yourselves at the same time becoming more and more selfish and more physically minded. If that's the case, you need prayers of the congregation. You need to be restored. You need assistance. Spiritually speaking, we're here for you. We want to help you. We want to pray for you. We love you. If you're here this afternoon and you've not yet become a Christian, understand that it is a spiritual kingdom that you can enter into. You can become a citizen of that kingdom by obeying the gospel, by putting on Christ in baptism based upon your belief and based upon your confession in Him, as we see exemplified in Acts chapter 8. Verses 34 through 39. If you have any spiritual need this afternoon, won't you please come forward as all together we stand and sing.